If you're interested in the art style of Western animation, go over to my Twitter where I post a bunch of my art, and I'm also hosting a redraw challenge in which we take screenshots and scenes from Western animation and we redraw them in our style. Fun fact, if I had a dime for each time I said I was going to upload consistently, maybe my school's lunch account wouldn't be in crippling and shattering debt.
You got boost power.
As opposed to the living toy commercial that was 1980s Saturday morning television, decades later have actually set a great trend of having a soul when it comes to their conception, which makes the creation of Ben 10's art style all the more inspiring. I grew up a fanatic of Ben 10, and believe me, I still am. As a 6-year-old, I used to eagerly browse CartoonNetwork.com for new Ben 10 clips when I wasn't at home already watching it on cable. I longed to have the Omnitrix. Every time I went to Toys R Us, I used to have an existential crisis because I knew I wouldn't have enough money to get the Gen 1 Omnitrix within the next 10 years. FYI, I still don't. And don't even get me started with the world premiere of Alien Force. You know how excited I was when I found out you could win Kevin's car? I could not even drive at the time. Even when my family lost cable, I was still on the Cartoon Network site using all my intelligence and power to find out who Albedo was and why he looked like Ben. You would think multiple shows, movies, video games, etc. about the same topic would get old after a decade and a half, but it's still utterly massive. Given a couple more decades, I think Ben 10 will stand aside staple heroes like Batman or Spider-Man. That is a massively bold statement, but Ben 10 takes notes from those IPs that push the franchise in the right direction, which is most evident in its characters and lore. But, for this video, I want to take a look at something a little more nuanced, most notably, the art direction. And we're talking about all the art direction.
Ben 10, only on Boomerang Reaper, your childhood reborn.
Sometime in the early 2000s, Man of Action was approached by Matt Sainrich, co-creator of Robot Chicken, to create concepts for a superhero action show. Within the next 3 weeks, they approached Sam Register and Tram Wigzo to pitch 20 ideas in 20 minutes, which meant that every 60 seconds, a brand new idea would be pitched to the network. By the 10th minute, they had already picked up Ben 10, and although the series was initially to be centered on transforming into superheroes, then alternate versions of Ben's self, the team eventually settled on Ben transforming into aliens. Stephen E. Gordon, Eric Knight, and Dave Johnson were all contributors for the character designs of the series since its initial conception. And since there are so few uber important names here, I want to go through a brief history of each before I get into what they contributed to the series. Stephen E. Gordon is a character designer and animator first seen in TV shows that date all the way back to the 80s, including Disney's Gummy Bears, OG DuckTales, and Gargoyles, along with many other projects. His stuff is basically peak comic book style, combined with a hint of Disney, and it's admittedly really awesome to look at. Stephen E. Gordon's work has been literally everywhere, including action genre cartoons, and it's no surprise that he would help put his foot forward on Ben 10. He was the initial artist behind Ben and his superhero personas, and I'll leave a link in the description to all these guys' profiles.
Run your wings and fly to your daddy. Take a dive. and swim to your daddy. Hit the bar and rock me, daddy.
Here is Ben's first design by Stephen E. Gordon, and as you can see, it's a thing. As opposed to the brown hair and iconic black and white shirt that most people associate with the character, we see a far less iconic form in my humble opinion. This very early version of Ben sports a lime green, orange, and red palette that I don't really think fits with itself. I don't know, the use of colors always seemed off to me. Mainly because unlike the final design, the concept design doesn't really have a central color you can associate with it. You can tell certain colors represent a character and a lot of effective characters. For example, in Avatar, each member of each respective nation has a color or two that represent who they are. Generally, you can tell a lot about their origin by the palette they rock. The series became much better at this, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Moving on to the supposed Omnitrix. I can't really figure out what this is supposed to be at first glance. It looks like a symbiote of some kind. The Omnitrix also adds to the problem I was discussing about just now. It's yellow. Why is it yellow? There seems to be no other instances of yellow in Ben's general design that make us think it's his favorite color or that it's the main color of the series. It's apparent that there's no visual cohesion when it comes down to how the character is represented. It's not to say that this is badly drawn, because that's the exact opposite. Since Stephen E. Gordon has been in the animation industry for over 20 years at this point, it's apparent that he has a good understanding of anatomy and gesture, and that his ability to convey personality in such a small, unpolished sketch is really cool. Though I was harsh on Gordon's depiction of Ben, I actually have a pretty decent opinion on the Omnitrix heroes. The color pattern is a lot more consistent, and each hero has distinct alien shapes that make it so that you can identify them even when they aren't in full color. The coolest thing that you can see is that these initial superhero concepts eventually evolved into some of the aliens that we actually see in the final show. And once you take a look at those and back to these, it's obvious. For the most part.
Ben Tennyson is your typical 10-year-old kid, except for the ability to transform into 10 different superheroes. Catch a sneak peek of Ben 10, Cartoon Network's newest cartoon at ben10.com. Ben 10, 1 part kid, 10 parts hero. Coming to the new Saturday mornings only on Cartoon Network.
If I were to choose an artist from this trio that best represents a modern comic book, it would be Eric Knight, who has worked for DC, Marvel Comics, Dark Horse Comics, and Image Comics, among many more indie publishers. Unlike Stephen E. Gordon, who has mainly been an animation industry member, Eric Knight was most obviously chosen to represent the comic book side of the spectrum, and you can see that in their art styles. Gordon's art, which is less anatomical and less detailed, coupled with his loose line work, makes it so that the animation staff has an easier time drawing each individual frame by having the opportunity to make it more expressive and confined to fewer guidelines. However, Knight's art is so much more structural, solid, and detailed, more specifically with the shading, which, although slightly can hinder the gesture of the overall piece, makes whatever he's drawing that much more three-dimensional. I think this sense of realism is what led to his designs for the aliens in Ben 10. The series shifted focus to the aliens in the Omnitrix instead of generic superheroes, and Eric Knight handled this stage. His art appeared to be more plausible as a real thing and much more realistic than anything we'd ever seen, especially compared to what the series would evolve to, or eventually devolve into depending on the way you look at it, and I mean a lot more realistic. Specifically the designs of aliens, although I can see why Cartoon Network didn't find these designs appealing. They're very unorthodox in terms of form and identity, and the 6 to 14-year-old target audience would probably find them disgusting. Although the designs of the aliens in the finalized series were still recognizable as non-earthly, you can very much tell what animal or object they're based on. I think these designs fail in the fact not because they weren't alien enough, but because they weren't recognizable enough. In the next part, we're going over Dave Johnson's designs, along with the aesthetic and overall animation of the first series. So if that piques your interest, go and support me and hit that button. And with that, my work here is done.
Get ready to blast off with the Ben 10 Time Machine. Yeah! Navigate your way through Ben's past, present, and into his future. With the Ben 10 Time Machine, blast off weekdays 8 a.m. on Cartoon Network.
Well,